This is a slower paced book than from what we were reading before. It is more of a story, and as such, it's a story from the perspective of a fellow Westerner whose name is Mark and eventually became a Swami, a Hindu monk. This story takes place in India as he transitions from his old identity as a software computer engineer, part of a consulting firm, and into a spiritual practitioner and a manager at an ashram, a spiritual hermitage or monastery. This chapter is aptly titled as Ashram on the Ganges, the most famous river in India, also known as the Ganga. And thank you, Jorts. Wednesday, March 8th. My travel alarm read 3:30 a.m. when I awoke that restless first night on the thinly cushioned cot. I could not fall back asleep. My sense of day and night was confused by the jet lag. It was too early to get up, so I stayed on the cot, listening to the soft roar of the nearby river. Then I heard Sanskrit chants sounding in the distance. A single, delicate voice intoned ancient hymns and set their melodies adrift through the still, dark sky. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but I soon realized that someone was reciting his morning prayers at a nearby ashram. When the chanting stopped, I dressed, grabbed a plastic bucket from the bathroom, and walked downstairs to get hot water for bathing. The air was cool and damp. Behind the office was a shack containing a huge water tank heated by a wood fire. I opened the tap, and steaming water filled my bucket. Back in my bathroom, I watched a tiny lizard scamper across the wall as I was bathing. He climbed to the ceiling and hung there in silence, watching me. These harmless lizards inhabit almost every house in India, so I resigned myself to sharing my room with him. I had heard a curious superstition about these lizards. If one loses its grip and falls on you, it is considered an omen, good or bad, depending on which part of your body it strikes. I pulled a white dhoti from my suitcase. Wearing jeans in the ashram would look very much out of place. I wrapped the cloth around my waist and carefully tucked in the loose end. I knew another dhoti-clad Westerner who once devoutly prostrated himself before his teacher. When he stood up, his dhoti fell to the floor, much to the amusement of a roomful of onlookers. I tugged at mine just to make sure it was secure. Even though I had worn one frequently, it felt strange at first to have my legs freed from the heavy, confining fabric of blue jeans. Then I pulled a white kurta shirt over my head and looked in the mirror to witness my transformation into a typical brahmachari. Typical, that is, except for my white skin and blue eyes. by the time I returned downstairs, the eastern sky had already begun to turn a deep indigo. Tea had been set out like yesterday afternoon, so I poured a cup and walked past the office and lecture hall toward the river. Sitting on a bench, sipping the hot chai, I was enveloped by a cozy blanket of sound. The river's gentle but insistent voice filled the air with music. In the dim light, I could make out the course of the Ganges, twisting its way through the hills and spilling over rocks and boulders in the riverbed. Here, just to the north of Rishikesh, the river takes a wide bend, curving slightly towards its source in the high Himalayas. To Hindus, a river's northward bend is symbolic of turning towards the source of all, a parallel to the curve in people's lives when they turn away from worldly activities to seek God. The area around such river bends is considered especially sacred. In the foothills, where the Himalayas start to climb above the fertile plains of North India, hundreds of ashrams have clustered along the Ganges' winding course, built upon the wooded floodplain and hillsides. The Swami Tadatmananda Ashram is situated on the bank of the Ganges in an area known as Purani Jhadi, the Old Thicket. Years ago, this place was home to just a few sadhus who lived in huts on what was then a remote strip of the jungle. Sometimes their huts were swept away when the monsoon turned the gentle river into a raging torrent. A few unfortunate sadhus were reported to have been swept away by the floods. Nowadays, the river's force has been tamed, and the red brick dwellings of townsfolk have crept nearby. Cries of children now break the silence of this once remote land. Many sadhus still live in simple huts here, but far more prominent are large, gracious ashrams that have been built along the river's edge. From my vantage point on the bench, I noticed a group of strange beehive-shaped stone huts standing on the bluff rising above the river's far bank. These meditation huts belong to the well-known ashram of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Rishikesh was plunged into instant but fleeting fame in the 1960s when the legendary Beatles came here to meet the famous meditation master. When I tried to visit that ashram a few days ago, I was chased away. Vijay later told me that proprietary Ayurvedic medicines are formulated at the ashram, and I might have been mistaken as a foreign spy. As the sky grew lighter, the sounds of worship at nearby temples drifted through the air. The crystalline jingle of bells mingled with the river's peaceful drone. Occasionally, the staccato beat of drums or the trumpeting of a conch shell resounded in the distance. Each ashram along the river has a shrine or temple where people gather every morning and evening to participate in a ritual called Puja. This twice-daily worship is routine in most ashrams, similar to the custom in Christian monasteries, where monks and nuns gather for prayer 5 or more times a day. My reverie was interrupted by a bell ringing nearby. Residents of our ashram were being called to morning puja. After washing and returning my cup, I went to join the others. Facing the Ganges was a little temple with an ornately sculpted dome, perhaps 20 feet tall, painted in shades of blue, pink, and creamy white. It was so small that only the priest and a few others could stand within. All other worshippers gathered outside the temple's open doorway. The white-robed priest performed the ritual offerings of flowers, incense, and food. The sweet fragrance of sandalwood wafted through the air. He waved burning camphor before the deity within while Sanskrit prayers were chanted, sometimes in unison, sometimes with the priest leading and others responding. I stood back and witnessed the puja in silence, listening to the ancient hymns while the Ganges continued to sing her own primeval song not far behind me. And so we end our reading therefore tonight. And I thank Swami Tadatmanandaji for his blessings in allowing me to read this book for you all. I love how he paints the atmosphere of what it's like to be staying at an ashram by the river Ganges near the foothills of the Himalayas, North India. I too would like to walk the same lands one day myself and get a direct experience with the spiritual lineages there stretching back to ancient times. Thanks to wonderful people like you. I have saved up more than halfway for a ticket there and back, and to that I must extend my gratitude.